De Courcy, The Weight of Rome. The oil lamp flickers against the marble wall, casting shadows that dance like ghosts across the scrolls scattered on Tiberius's desk. It's past the 10th hour, and Rome sleeps fitfully around him, but sleep eludes those who carry the weight of an empire's dying breath. He sets down his stylus and rubs his temples, feeling the familiar ache that has become his constant companion these past months. Through the narrow window of his study, he can see the city sprawling below, thousands of oil lamps creating a constellation of human worry, human hope, human exhaustion. Each light represents a family wondering if tomorrow will bring news of victory from the Germanic frontier, or word that the plague has claimed another neighborhood, another child, another dream. Tiberius is 43 years old, though he feels ancient tonight. His hair, once the rich brown of fertile earth, now shows threads of silver that catch the lamplight. His hands, these hands that have signed requisitions for grain shipments, approved construction of hospitals, authorized payments to the families of fallen soldiers. These hands shake slightly as he reaches for a fresh piece of papyrus. The letter he's about to write will never be sent. How could it be? Its intended recipient exists only in possibility, in the uncertain future that stretches ahead like an uncharted sea. To Tiberius Claudius Maximus, he whispers to himself, testing the words. From Tiberius Claudius Maximus, written in the consulship of Cornelius Priscus and Marcus-Aurelius, in the year when the gods seem to have turned their faces from Rome. He pauses, listening to the city's nighttime symphony. Somewhere, a woman weeps. Somewhere else, a child coughs with the dry, persistent sound that has become too familiar. In the distance, the night watch calls out their reassurances. All is well, though everyone knows it isn't true. The Antonine plague arrived like a thief 3 years ago, slipping through the empire's borders with returning soldiers. At first, the physicians spoke confidently of treatments, of prayers, of imperial intervention. Now they simply count the dead and burn incense to ward off the stench of funeral pyres that never seem to cool. Tiberius has read the reports. 20% of the population in some provinces, perhaps more. The numbers blur together after a while, becoming abstract, until you walk through the forum and notice how many familiar faces have simply vanished. Marcus, who sold the finest olives from his family's groves in Campania, gone. Julia, the weaver whose tapestries decorated the homes of senators, gone. Little Gaius, who used to chase pigeons around the temple of Vesta while his mother conducted business, gone. The weight of their absence sits heavy in Tiberius's chest as he dips his stylus in ink. What words do you write to a future that might not exist? What wisdom do you pass along when you're not even certain there will be anyone left to receive it? If you are reading this, he begins, his handwriting careful and precise despite his fatigue, then somehow we survived. Somehow Rome endured. Somehow the gods remembered their affection for this city of 7 hills that has grown to encompass the world. He stops, staring at the words. Such hope feels almost naive. But what is the alternative? Despair serves no one. Least of all the people depending on administrators like him to keep the machinery of empire functioning while everything crumbles at the edges. Through his window, he can see the aqueduct that brings fresh water from the mountains. Even now, in these dark times, the water flows. The engineers maintain their careful calculations. The slaves and freedmen who tend the system show up each day doing their work with the same dedication their fathers and grandfathers brought to the task. There's something profound in that continuity, something that speaks to a resilience deeper than politics or plague. Rome isn't just buildings and laws and military might. It's the accumulated weight of human effort, generation after generation, each person adding their small contribution to something larger than themselves. I wonder, he writes, what you remember of these days. Do the histories speak of Marcus Aurelius's campaigns against the Germanic tribes? Do they mention how the emperor himself died of plague while fighting to hold the Danube frontier? Or have these events faded into the background noise of imperial chronology? Just another crisis weathered, another challenge overcome? The lamp flame gutters slightly, and Tiberius adjusts the wick. He's learned to be careful with oil these days. Supply chains that once seemed as permanent as the Tiber itself now prove fragile. Merchants who used to travel freely between provinces now risk bandits, disease, and the chaos that follows in the wake of retreating armies. Everything feels provisional, temporary, as if the solid foundations of Roman civilization might dissolve like salt in water if the wrong wind blows. I confess, he continues writing, that I am tired. Not the pleasant tiredness that comes after honest labor, but the bone-deep weariness of carrying responsibilities too large for any one person. Each day brings new requests I cannot fulfill, new problems I cannot solve, new tragedies I cannot prevent. He thinks of the morning's correspondence. A letter from Gaul requesting additional grain shipments to replace crops destroyed by Germanic raiders. A report from Egypt describing riots in Alexandria as food prices continue to climb. A plea from the governor of Britannia for more troops to reinforce Hadrian's Wall, where Pictish raids have intensified. And beneath it all, the constant arithmetic of plague. How many soldiers can we afford to lose? How many workers? How many children who will never grow up to become the next generation of citizens, soldiers, farmers, craftsmen? Sometimes, he writes, I climb to the roof of this building and look out over the city, trying to imagine what you see when you look at the same view. Are the temples still standing? Do people still gather in the forum to argue about politics and trade gossip? Do children still play in the streets, their laughter echoing off the ancient stones? The question hangs in the air like incense smoke. Tiberius sets down his stylus and walks to the window, pressing his palm against the cool stone of the sill. Below him, Rome breathes with the rhythm of a sleeping giant. Peaceful now, but he knows that with dawn will come fresh challenges, new crises, more impossible decisions. He returns to his desk, to the letter that serves as both confession and prayer. I want you to know, he writes, that we tried. Whatever mistakes we made, whatever opportunities we missed, whatever failures history records against our names, we tried. We showed up each day and did the work, even when the work felt meaningless, especially when it felt meaningless. The words surprise him with their intensity, but they're true. In a world where certainty has become a luxury no one can afford, showing up feels like an act of defiance. Maintaining the routines of civilization while civilization itself trembles. Perhaps that's its own form of heroism. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, he continues. I don't know if Marcus Aurelius will return victorious from the Danube, or if news will arrive that the frontier has collapsed entirely. I don't know if the plague will burn itself out, or if it will continue consuming the empire like a slow fire. He pauses, listening to the night sounds of the city. Somewhere, a cart rumbles over cobblestones. Somewhere else, voices murmur in conversation too distant to understand. Life continues, stubborn and persistent as weeds growing through cracks in marble. But I know this, he writes. Rome is more than any single crisis, more than any emperor or war or plague. It lives in the hands that built these roads, the minds that designed these aqueducts, the hearts that chose to keep faith with something larger than themselves. The lamp flame steadies, and for a moment the shadows on the wall seem less like ghosts and more like guardians. Tiberius feels something shift in his chest. Not hope, exactly, but something quieter and more durable. Acceptance, perhaps, or simply the recognition that his small part in this vast story matters, even if he'll never see how it ends. "Sleep well, future Tiberius," he writes. "Sleep well and remember us kindly." The letter remains unfinished, its author finally surrendering to the exhaustion that has been calling his name for hours. But in the morning, he will return to his desk, to his responsibilities, to the endless work of holding the world together, one decision at a time. Whispers of the city. The oil lamp flickers beside him, casting dancing shadows across the scrolls that line his study walls. Tiberius lifts his head from his letter, listening to the symphony of Rome settling into its restless sleep. Even in these plague-darkened times, the city never truly rests. It breathes, sighs, whispers its ancient stories into the night air. From somewhere beyond his window comes the rhythmic call of the vigils, the night watchmen making their rounds through streets that once teemed with merchants and citizens from every corner of the empire. "All is well," they cry, though everyone knows it isn't. Still, the familiar words comfort him. Some rituals endure, even when the world tilts toward chaos. He remembers when those same streets pulsed with different energy. The Via Appia, alive with traders bringing silk from the distant lands beyond Persia. Amphorae of wine from Gaul, precious metals from the mines of Hispania. Now, many of those routes have gone silent, not just from the plague, but from the pressure of tribes pushing against Rome's borders, seeking what Rome itself has always sought: safety, prosperity, a place to call home. The sound of cartwheels reaches him, wooden wheels grinding against stone. Someone is moving through the city despite the late hour, perhaps a physician rushing to tend the sick, or a family fleeing to relatives in the countryside. He doesn't judge them for leaving. He's thought of it himself, of taking his small household and retreating to his family's villa in Campania, where the air is cleaner and the plague's grip less certain. But duty holds him here. Duty. And something else he can't quite name. A stubborn belief that Rome needs witnesses, that someone must stay to record what happens when the greatest empire the world has ever known faces its deepest trial. A faint strain of music drifts through the night, someone playing a flute in a distant courtyard. The melody is hauntingly beautiful, one of those old songs that mothers sing to comfort their children. He wonders who is awake at this hour, finding solace in music, perhaps another soul like himself, unable to sleep while carrying the weight of too many responsibilities. The scent of bread reaches him suddenly, bakers beginning their work before dawn. This surprises him. So many bakeries have closed as grain shipments from Egypt grow unreliable. But someone is still working, still feeding the city. The smell reminds him of mornings from his childhood when Rome seemed invincible and the future stretched ahead like an endless road paved with marble and possibility. He thinks of the marketplace near the Forum, how it looked just 3 years ago. Vendors calling out their wares in a dozen languages, children darting between the stalls, senators and slaves alike haggling over the price of olives, the air thick with the scent of spices and the sound of laughter. Now that same space stands largely empty. Grass grows between the stones. Stray dogs wander where merchants once displayed their finest goods. Last month, he spoke with Marcus Flavius, one of the few traders still operating in the city. The man had grown thin, his clothes hanging loose on his frame. "The routes to the north are nearly impossible," Marcus had told him. "Too many raids, too much uncertainty. And even if we could get the goods through, who has coin to buy them?" But Marcus hadn't given up entirely. He'd adapted, trading in smaller quantities, dealing in necessities rather than luxuries. "People still need lamp oil," he'd said with a weary smile. "They still need salt for preserving food. The empire may be changing, but people still need to live." That conversation had stayed with Tiberius, the quiet dignity of someone finding ways to serve even as the world transformed around him. It reminded him why he remains at his post, why he continues to process reports and make decisions that feel increasingly insignificant against the vastness of Rome's challenges. The night air carries another sound, the distant lowing of cattle, a herd being driven through the city, probably heading to market at first light. Life persists, commerce continues. People find ways to adapt, to survive, to hope. He dips his quill again, letting the ink gather at its tip before touching it to the parchment. The formal words come to him as naturally as breathing, the language of official correspondence that has been his life for so many years. To Tiberius Claudius Maximus, administrator of the urban prefecture, in whatever year you may read these words, greetings. The formality feels both appropriate and strange. He is writing to himself, but to a self that exists in some unknowable future, a man who may look back on these plague years as either the beginning of Rome's end, or simply another chapter in its long story of survival and transformation. I write to you from the consulship of Marcus Aurelius, in the year when the great pestilence has touched every corner of our empire, when the northern tribes press against our borders with increasing boldness, and when the future seems as uncertain as morning mist. He pauses, listening again to the city's nighttime chorus. Somewhere, a dog barks. A shutter creaks in the wind. The watchmen call out their reassurances to the darkness, all the small sounds of a city that refuses to surrender, even in its hour of greatest trial. Perhaps you read this in a time of peace, when the plague is only a memory and Rome has found new strength. Perhaps you read it in circumstances I cannot imagine, in a world transformed beyond my recognition. Either way, I want you to know what we carried here, in these dark hours before dawn. The words flow more easily now, as if speaking to his future self has unlocked something in his heart. He thinks of all the reports that cross his desk, all the small dramas and large tragedies that make up the daily life of empire. The widow seeking permission to sell her husband's workshop, the merchant requesting safe passage for a grain shipment, the soldier asking for leave to visit his dying mother. Each request represents a life, a story, a hope that tomorrow might be better than today. And somehow, in the accumulation of all these small acts of administration, something larger takes shape, not just the machinery of government, but the human determination to continue, to build, to care for one another, even when the foundations shake. A cool breeze stirs the curtains, bringing with it the scent of rain. Soon the summer heat will break, and autumn will arrive with its promise of harvest and renewal. The seasons turn regardless of human suffering, offering their own form of comfort. What seems permanent is often temporary. What seems hopeless often gives way to unexpected possibility. He writes steadily now, his hand moving across the parchment with growing confidence. This letter to his future self is becoming something more than he intended, a testament, a prayer, a bridge across time connecting this moment of uncertainty to whatever lies ahead. The city whispers around him, 10,000 stories unfolding in the darkness, and he writes on, adding his voice to the eternal conversation between past and future, between hope and fear, between the Rome that was and the Rome that might yet be. Echoes of the past. The ink flows steadily across the papyrus, each word a small act of defiance against the uncertainty that surrounds him. As Tiberius writes, his mind drifts backward, through the corridors of memory, to the boy he once was. He remembers the villa where he spent his childhood, the way morning light fell across the marble floors of his father's library, the scent of scrolls and wax tablets, the patient voice of his tutor Gaius reading aloud from the great philosophers. Even then, as a child of 7 or 8, he sensed that these words carried something precious. something that could anchor a soul when the world grew dark. Virtue is the only true good, his tutor would say, unrolling another text. External things, wealth, position, even health, these are neither good nor evil in themselves. They are simply indifferent. The concept had seemed strange to young Tiberius then. Living as he did in comfort and privilege, how could wealth be indifferent? How could position mean nothing? But Gaius was patient, always patient, explaining that these teachings came from men who had faced real hardship, real loss. The philosophers who teach us about resilience, Gaius had said one afternoon, they learned their wisdom in the furnace of experience. They discovered what truly matters when everything else was stripped away. Now, sitting in his study while plague stalks the streets below, Tiberius understands the comfortable certainties of his youth have dissolved, one by one, like salt in water. What remains is exactly what those ancient teachers promised would remain, the capacity to choose his response, to find meaning in duty, to maintain dignity in the face of forces beyond his control. He pauses in his writing, letting his mind settle on the figure who has become his greatest teacher, though they have never met face to face. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, the man who carries the weight of an empire while plague and war tear at its borders. Tiberius has read the emperor's private writings, the notes Marcus makes to himself in quiet moments, reflections on duty and mortality and the strange beauty of a life lived in service to something greater than oneself. These meditations circulate quietly among the administrative class, copied and shared by men who find in them a kind of spiritual sustenance. You have power over your mind, not outside events, the emperor writes. Realize this, and you will find strength. The words echo in Tiberius's memory as he considers his own circumstances, the plague that ravages Rome, the barbarian pressures on the frontier, the slow erosion of the old certainties. None of these are within his control, but his response to them, his commitment to his duties, his refusal to surrender to despair, these remain his own. He dips his stylus again and continues writing to his future self. I think often of our emperor, this remarkable man who must make decisions that affect millions while wrestling with the same questions that trouble any thoughtful soul. How does one balance the demands of duty with the pull of philosophy? How does one maintain inner peace while managing the chaos of empire? The lamp flame wavers slightly, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Tiberius reaches for the small bronze trimmer, carefully adjusting the wick. The light steadies, grows brighter, and he returns to his letter. Marcus Aurelius teaches us that we are like actors in a play, assigned our roles by forces beyond our understanding. The wise person does not rage against the part he has been given, but strives to play it well, with honor and grace. He thinks of the emperor now, perhaps awake in his own study, wrestling with reports from the German frontier or news of the plague's spread. Does Marcus Aurelius ever feel the weight of loneliness that settles on Tiberius in these quiet hours? Does he ever wonder if his efforts matter, if the empire he serves so faithfully will survive the storms that batter it? But then Tiberius remembers another passage from the emperor's meditations, words that have sustained him through many difficult nights. Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Change. Yes, that is the constant. The Rome of his childhood is not the Rome of today, and the Rome of today will not be the Rome of tomorrow. But this is not cause for despair. It is simply the nature of existence. Rivers change their course. Seasons follow their eternal cycle. Empires rise and transform and find new forms. His role, his duty, is not to prevent change, but to meet it with wisdom, with courage, with the kind of steady virtue that his teachers promised would never fail him. The night air carries new sounds now, the distant call of the watch, the creak of wooden shutters, the soft footsteps of someone hurrying home through empty streets. Each sound speaks of human persistence, of people continuing their lives despite uncertainty, despite fear. Tiberius finds comfort in this, in the knowledge that he is part of something larger and more enduring than his individual concerns. The administrative work he does, the decisions he makes, the example he sets, these ripple outward in ways he may never fully understand. He is a thread in a vast tapestry, and while he cannot see the full pattern, he can ensure that his thread is strong, that it holds true to its proper place. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy, Marcus Aurelius writes. The best response to chaos is not to become chaotic, but to embody the very virtues that chaos seeks to destroy. This, Tiberius realizes, is perhaps the deepest wisdom of all. In a time when plague breeds fear, when uncertainty tempts people towards selfishness or despair, the most radical act is to remain committed to justice, to compassion, to the patient work of building rather than destroying. He writes these thoughts to his future self, hoping that the man who reads this letter, whether in months or years to come, will remember not just the challenges of this moment, but the choices made in response to those challenges, will remember that it is possible to face darkness without becoming dark, to acknowledge suffering without surrendering to it. The lamp burns steadily now, its light a small but constant presence in the vast night. Like his own efforts, like the efforts of countless others who choose duty over comfort, service over self-interest, hope over despair. Outside his window, Rome sleeps fitfully, a city of marble and dreams, of ancient glory and uncertain future. But it endures, as it has endured so much before, sustained by the accumulated choices of ordinary people who decide, each in their own small way, to keep faith with something larger than themselves. Tiberius sets down his stylus for a moment, flexes his fingers, and prepares to continue writing. There is more to say, more wisdom to gather from the storehouse of memory, more hope to kindle against the darkness. The conversation between past and future continues, one careful word at a time. The plague's shadow. He dips the stylus again, the bronze tip catching the lamplight as he considers his next words. The plague. He must write of the plague, not as the administrators speak of it in their reports, with their careful tallies and measured responses, but as it truly is, as it lives in the hearts of those who remain. You will want to know, he writes slowly, what it was like to live through these days when death walked so freely among us, when the very air seemed to carry whispers of ending, and every farewell might be the last. The words feel heavy as he forms them, each letter a small act of witness. Outside, a dog barks once and falls silent. Even the animals sense the change, the way the city holds its breath between one day and the next. He remembers the morning 3 months ago when Gaius Marcellus failed to appear at the forum. Gaius, who had never missed a day of business in 20 years, who prided himself on his punctuality and his firm handshake. They found him in his villa, already cold, his face bearing the telltale signs of the fever that had claimed so many others. There was a man, Tiberius writes, a friend, who believed that discipline could conquer any adversity. He rose each day before dawn, took cold baths to strengthen his constitution, ate simply, and lived according to the old virtues. The plague took him as easily as it took the dissolute and the weak. The memory stings still, not just the loss, but the terrible democracy of this disease. It respected neither virtue nor vice, neither wealth nor poverty. It simply came and chose and left the living to make sense of what remained. He sets down the stylus again, rises from his chair, walks to the small window that faces the Subura. Even from this distance, even at this hour, he can smell the smoke. Not the pleasant wood smoke of cooking fires, but something else. Something that speaks of necessity, of choices no one should have to make. The funeral pyres burn day and night now. There are not enough priests for proper rites, not enough mourners for proper grief. Families burn their dead in hurried ceremonies, or leave them for the city's workers, men who have become strange heroes in these strange times. Returning to his desk, he continues writing. I have seen things that would have seemed impossible in my youth. Senators carrying bodies to the flames because there was no one else to do it. Slaves freed by death, their masters gone, wandering the streets like ghosts of a former order. Children caring for parents, parents burying children, the natural progression of generations scattered like leaves in an autumn wind. His hand trembles slightly as he writes these words, not from fear, but from the weight of bearing witness. Someone must record not just the facts, but the feeling. Someone must remember not just who died, but how the living carried on. The physicians work without rest, he continues, though they know their remedies offer little more than comfort. I have watched them move from house to house, their faces grave with knowledge they cannot speak aloud. They have become priests of a different sort, offering not salvation but presence, not cure but care. There was young Marcus Fabius, barely past his training, who spent his days in the poorest quarters of the city. Tiberius had seen him just last week, hollow-eyed with exhaustion, his medical bag worn thin from constant use. When asked why he continued when so little could be done, the young man had simply said, because they should not die alone. Such simple words, such profound courage. This too must be remembered. This too must be passed forward to whatever future awaits beyond these dark months. You will wonder, Tiberius writes, how we maintained hope when hope seemed foolish, how we continued to plan and dream when each day brought fresh evidence of life's fragility. The answer is not noble, not philosophical. We continued because we had to, because the alternative was to surrender not just our lives, but our humanity. He thinks of the markets that still open each morning, though fewer vendors come and fewer customers browse their wares. He thinks of the teachers who still gather their students, though the classes grow smaller each week. He thinks of the actors who still perform in the theater, their voices echoing in half-empty halls, their gestures defiant against the silence. There is something in us, he writes, some stubborn flame that refuses to be extinguished. It is not courage exactly, nor wisdom, but something more fundamental, the simple insistence that life, ordinary life, must go on, that bread must be baked, that children must learn their letters, that lovers must meet in secret gardens, that old men must write letters to themselves across the years. The lamp flickers, sending shadows dancing across the papyrus. He adjusts the wick, steadies the flame, and continues writing. These small acts of maintenance, of keeping things working, feel suddenly precious, sacred, even. I hope, he writes carefully, that when you read these words, you will live in a time when such plagues are only stories, when the fear that stalks our streets is only a memory preserved in old letters and forgotten histories. But if you should face such trials yourself, remember this: we endured, Not because we were strong, but because we chose, again and again, to be human. He pauses, considers crossing out these last words, then lets them stand. They feel true, truer than any of the official accounts that will survive in the imperial archives. Those will speak of policy responses, of trade disruptions, of military implications. They will not speak of Gaius Marcellus, or young Marcus Fabius, or the countless unnamed who simply carried on. The dead deserve remembrance, he writes, but the living deserve recognition too, for their small acts of kindness, for their stubborn refusal to let fear make them cruel, for their insistence on finding beauty even in these diminished days. Yesterday he had seen a woman, a stranger, sharing her meager bread with a child not her own. The day before, an old man had been teaching a group of boys to play dice in the forum, laughing at their clumsy attempts, as if the future still held room for games and learning. These moments, these tiny victories of the human spirit, matter as much as any triumph recorded in stone, perhaps more, for they speak not to what we can achieve when everything goes well, but to who we choose to be when everything falls apart. Be gentle with yourself, he writes, addressing his future self directly. If you find yourself tested by circumstances beyond your control, remember that survival itself is a form of victory, that maintaining kindness in cruel times is a form of heroism, that writing letters to the future is a form of faith. The stylus moves more slowly now, each word considered, weighed, chosen with care. Outside, the city sleeps its uneasy sleep, but here in this small circle of lamplight, the conversation continues. Past speaking to future, witness speaking to memory, one careful word at a time. The northern frontier. Tiberius sets down his stylus, flexes his fingers slowly, watches the shadows dance across his knuckles. The ache in his hand speaks of hours spent in this position. But there is more to write, more to remember, more to preserve for whatever comes next. His thoughts drift northward, beyond the 7 hills, beyond the familiar roads and aqueducts, to the distant Danube where Roman soldiers stand watch against the Germanic tribes. Even here in his study, he can almost feel the bite of that northern wind, the weight of armor in endless rain, the loneliness of men far from home. He has never served on that frontier himself, but he has read the reports, spoken with the veterans, seen the haunted look that settles behind their eyes. The plague may rage in Rome, but on the Danube, death wears different clothes, carries different weapons, speaks in tongues that sound like winter itself. Dipping his stylus again, he continues his letter, his voice a whisper in the stillness. You will remember the stories they told, the soldiers who returned from the northern campaigns, how they spoke of forests that seemed to swallow sound, of enemies who knew every tree and stream, of nights so cold that wine froze in the cup and breath turned to ice on beards. The lamplight flickers, casting his shadow large against the wall, then small again. He thinks of Marcus-Aurelius, who died just 4 years ago in that very region, the philosopher-emperor who spent his final years not in the comfort of Rome, but in military camps along a hostile border. The emperor understood what many of us forget, that civilization is not a given, not a permanent gift, but something that must be defended, maintained, renewed with each generation. While we debate philosophy in comfortable rooms, others stand in mud and snow, holding the line against chaos. Tiberius pauses, listening to the distant sound of the night watch calling the hour. Even here, even now, someone stands guard. The thought brings him a strange comfort. this endless chain of vigilance, this quiet heroism of the watch. They say the Germanic tribes grow bolder, more organized, more desperate. Hunger drives them south, toward our borders, toward the wealth and warmth of the empire. Can we blame them? Would we not do the same, faced with harsh winters and failing harvests? And yet, we must hold the line, not from cruelty, but from necessity. He rotates his wrist slowly, feeling the tension release, then tightens his grip on the stylus once more. There is something almost ritualistic about this small gesture, this preparation for more words, more thoughts committed to wax and memory. I think often of the centurions, those weathered men who know their soldiers' names, who share their rations, who write letters home for those who cannot write. They carry a different kind of burden than we administrators, immediate, physical, measured not in policy, but in lives. The oil in his lamp burns lower now, the flame smaller but steadier, as if settling into its work for the long hours ahead. Tiberius adjusts the wick carefully, preserving the light, extending this moment of connection across time. There was a veteran, Marcus Flavius, who came to my office seeking compensation for a wound that left him lame. He spoke little of the fighting, but much of the cold, how it crept through armor, through blankets, through the very bones, how the men would huddle together for warmth, Romans and auxiliaries alike, differences forgotten in the democracy of suffering. He told me of a night when the Germanic warriors attacked during a blizzard, how visibility dropped to nothing, how the battle became a confusion of shadows and steel and snow. He said the only way to tell friend from enemy was by the sound of their breathing, the rhythm of their fear, the particular way each man called out to his gods. Tiberius sets down his stylus again, this time to massage his temples, to ease the weight of these imagined scenes, these borrowed memories that feel increasingly real in the lamplight's glow. What strikes me most in these accounts is not the violence, though that is real enough, but the small acts of preservation. Soldiers sharing their last piece of bread, officers giving up their cloaks to younger men, medics crawling through arrow fall to reach the wounded. Even in the chaos of war, especially in the chaos of war, humanity persists. The wax tablet before him shows the accumulated weight of his thoughts, line after line of careful script, a testament to this night's work, this conversation with tomorrow. He traces one finger along the edge, feeling the slight warmth where his hand has rested. I fear for our frontiers, not because our soldiers lack courage, but because the challenges grow ever greater while our resources grow ever thinner. The plague has taken not just lives, but tax revenue, not just workers, but the sons who might have served. We ask more and more of fewer and fewer, and still they answer the call. Outside, a dog barks once, then settles back into silence. The sound reminds him that even in this great city, even surrounded by walls and guards and the accumulated strength of centuries, the wild is never far away. Order is always temporary, always fragile, always in need of tending. Perhaps that is the lesson of the northern frontier. That civilization is not a fortress, but a garden. It requires constant attention, careful cultivation, the willingness to stand watch through long seasons of uncertainty. The Germanic tribes are not our only enemy. Complacency is, division is, the slow erosion of the civic virtues that make us Roman. He lifts his stylus once more, but hesitates, struck suddenly by the weight of what he is attempting, to capture in words the complexity of empire, the burden of leadership, the cost of peace. It seems almost presumptuous. And yet, what else can he do? What other gift can he offer to the future than this honest accounting, this careful witness? When you read this, years from now, the crisis of our moment may seem distant, quaint perhaps, easily solved by hindsight's clarity. But remember the uncertainty we carry, the decisions made without knowing their consequences, the faith required to plant seeds in winter soil. The flame gutters slightly, recovers, burns on, like the empire itself, like the men on the distant frontier, like this conversation across time, enduring, adapting, continuing despite all obstacles. Remember, too, the price of peace, paid not just in gold but in sleepless nights, in young men who will never see home again, in the quiet heroism of those who stand watch while others sleep safely in their beds. A glimmer of hope. The lamp's flame settles into steadiness, and with it, something shifts in the quality of the darkness around him, not the harsh darkness of despair, but the gentle darkness that comes before dawn, pregnant with possibility, rich with the promise of light to come. Tiberius sets down his reed pen and flexes his fingers, feeling the slight ache that comes from hours of writing, from pouring one's soul onto parchment in the deep watches of the night. The letter lies before him, pages of careful script that chronicle not just his thoughts, but his journey through the labyrinth of doubt and fear towards something that feels, surprisingly, like hope. He rises from his chair, moves to the window, and draws back the heavy curtain. The city spreads below him in the pre-dawn hush, and there, just there on the eastern horizon, the faintest suggestion of light. Not yet dawn, but the promise of dawn. The way darkness begins to soften at its edges when the sun prepares to return to the world. From this height, Rome looks almost peaceful, the forums and temples emerging from shadow like ancient dreams taking shape, the aqueducts carrying their precious cargo of mountain water, the roads that stretch out like arteries, carrying the lifeblood of empire to every corner of the known world. Even now, even in these troubled times, the eternal city endures. And in that endurance, Tiberius finds something he had almost forgotten, not the brittle optimism of those who refuse to see darkness, but the deeper hope of those who have looked into the abyss and chosen to believe in light anyway. He thinks of the baker who still rises before dawn to knead tomorrow's bread, though grain grows scarce and customers fewer, the temple priest who still tends the sacred flame, though fewer worshippers come to pray, the mother who still sings lullabies to her children, though the future feels uncertain as morning mist. These small acts of faith, these quiet assertions that tomorrow will come and be worth preparing for, they are the true foundation of any civilization. Not the marble columns or the golden eagles, but the daily choice to continue, to hope, to build something beautiful despite the shadows. The light grows stronger now, and with it comes the first stirring of the city below. Somewhere a rooster crows, and another answers. The sound carries him back to childhood, to summer mornings at his uncle's villa outside the city, when the world seemed vast with possibility, and every day brought new wonders to explore. That boy still lives within him, he realizes, older now, marked by loss and responsibility, but still capable of wonder, still able to see beauty in the way morning light catches the dome of a temple, still moved by acts of kindness, still believing that human beings are capable of greatness even in their darkest hours. He returns to his desk, takes up the pen one final time, and begins to write the closing words of his letter to the future. My friend across the years. I find myself at the end of this long night with something I did not expect to carry into dawn. Hope. Not the shallow hope that pretends all is well, but the deep hope that knows all is not well, and chooses to believe in healing anyway. I have told you of plague and war, of loss and fear, and the weight of impossible choices. These things are real, and they matter, and they have marked me in ways that will never fully heal. But they are not the whole story. The whole story includes the physician who tends the sick, though she knows she risks her own life, the soldier who writes letters home for his illiterate comrades, the senator who speaks truth, though it costs him influence, the slave who shows kindness, though the world has shown him little. The whole story includes you, reading these words in whatever time you inhabit, carrying forward some spark of what we were, adding your own light to the great chain of human endeavor that stretches back to the first person who ever looked at the stars and wondered, and forward to others we cannot imagine but must trust to carry the flame. For that is what we do. We human beings. We carry light through darkness. We tell stories that preserve what matters. We love despite loss, hope despite disappointment, build despite the knowledge that time will claim our works as surely as it claims our bodies. And in this carrying forward, this passing of the torch from hand to hand across the generations, we find our immortality, not in the preservation of our individual selves, but in our participation in something larger, older, more enduring than any single life. I think of Marcus Aurelius, writing his own thoughts by lamplight in some distant military camp, never knowing that his words would outlive his empire, would speak comfort to souls not yet born, would kindle hope in hearts facing trials he could never imagine. He wrote for himself, as I write for you, but the words belong now to time itself, to the great conversation that began when humans first learned to speak, and will continue as long as consciousness endures. So I give you these words, this witness to one man's journey through one particular darkness, not because my story is special, but because every story is special. Every voice matters. Every choice to hope instead of despair adds something irreplaceable to the great tapestry of human experience. Remember the plague years? Yes, but remember also the healers. Remember the wars, but remember also the peacemakers. Remember the fear, but remember also the courage. Remember that even in the darkest times, people chose love, chose service, chose to believe that their efforts mattered even when they could not see the outcome. And know that you are part of this great chain, this unbroken line of souls who looked into uncertainty and chose to plant seeds anyway, who faced tomorrow without guarantees and decided to make it beautiful anyway, who carried light through their particular darkness and passed it on, still burning, still warm with the hope of human hearts, still bright enough to illuminate the next step, and the next, and the next. The sun rises now over Rome, and somewhere, in some time I cannot imagine, it rises over your world as well. Different cities, different challenges, but the same sun, the same light, the same choice offered new to every generation, to despair or to hope, to surrender or to continue, to curse the darkness or to kindle flame. Choose flame. My friend, choose hope. Choose to believe that your story matters, that your light is needed, that the future is still being written and your hand holds the pen. And when your own dark night comes, as it comes to all of us, remember this moment, this choice, this decision to trust in something larger than our fears. Remember that you are not alone, that you never were alone, that every person who ever chose hope over despair walks with you, that every act of love echoes forward into tomorrow, that every word of truth becomes part of the eternal conversation that makes us human. The darkness is passing, my friend, the light returns, and we endure, we continue, we hope, we love, we pass the flame from hand to hand across the generations, and in this passing, we find our purpose, our peace, our place in the great story that has no ending, only new chapters, new voices, new light kindled from the eternal fire that burns at the heart of human hope. Tiberius sets down the pen, reads over the final words, and nods slowly. The letter is complete. This conversation across time. This bridge built of words and hope spanning the gulf between present uncertainty and future possibility. He takes the sheets of parchment, rolls them carefully into a scroll, and seals them with warm wax pressed with his signet ring. The letter feels heavier than its physical weight, as if it carries not just words, but something of his soul, his faith, his hard-won hope distilled into symbols on parchment. He places the scroll in a wooden box lined with silk, a container worthy of the treasure it will hold, and sets it carefully on the shelf beside his other precious things, his father's writings, his mother's jewelry, the small objects that anchor memory and meaning in the flow of time. The lamp burns low now, its oil nearly spent, its work nearly done. Like himself, like all of us, faithful in its service, bright in its burning, ready to rest when the task is complete. He blows gently, and the flame gutters, flickers, and goes out, leaving only the sweet smell of oil and wick, and the growing light of dawn streaming through the window, warm on his face, bright with promise, rich with the hope of new beginnings. And Tiberius smiles, knowing that somewhere across the years, in some tomorrow, he will never see. His words wait to kindle light in another heart, another soul choosing hope over despair, another voice joining the eternal conversation that makes us human. And in this knowing, this faith in the future, this trust in the great chain of human hope that stretches from the first dawn to the last, he finds his peace, his purpose, his place in the story that has no ending, and walks toward his rest, toward sleep, toward dreams filled with light, carrying within himself the quiet certainty that darkness passes, that hope endures, that love transcends time, and that every word spoken in faith becomes part of the eternal song that calls us home to ourselves, to each other, to the light that burns forever at the heart of the human story.